Good evening, football fans. Welcome to Between the Tackles. I'm your host, Minicozzi, and in the first episode, we're going to talk about the team that I grew up watching, the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's get started. So, if you've been keeping up with sports media at all in about the past week or so, you would have seen that Carson Wentz got traded to the Indianapolis Colts in exchange for a third-round pick this year and a conditional second-round pick next year. Now, a lot of Eagles fans think that we got absolutely shafted on this trade. But let's be honest, Indy had all the leverage in terms of getting this deal done. First of all, Carson just did not want to be in Philadelphia anymore, and considering the no-trade clause on his contract, he determines what team he goes to. Not to mention, he absolutely forgot how to play football last year, and on top of all of that, he's getting paid 9 figures to basically suck. Personally, I don't think that there was any other option than trading Carson Wentz. The guy simply didn't want to be here anymore, and to be quite honest, you don't want to force a guy to be on your team, especially when he's the leader of that locker room. But that being said, I don't think Carson Wentz is really the source of the problem here. Many people blame Doug Pederson. They'll start by talking about the play calling and mentioning his staff and how after Frank Reich and John DeFilippo left, this offense wasn't the same as it was the year we won the Super Bowl, which is a very valid point and makes a whole lot of sense, but I think that there's a lot deeper of an issue here. First of all, Doug Pederson was never an X's and O's guy, as you would say. He was never a playbook kind of guy. He was a locker room guy. He built a culture. And after that loss to the Washington football team, you can argue that he lost the locker room. I mean, the locker room was at the very least divided, deciding whether Doug Pederson was really, concerned with the best interest of the players after benching Jalen Hurts, and whether he was even, qualified to do his job. And while Doug Pederson lost the locker room and even his job, what was firing Doug Pederson going to accomplish this season? The coaching market was absolutely, inept. The best candidate was probably Urban Meyer or Brandon Staley, but they weren't coming to Philly. There was nothing attracting a head coach to this job. And as a matter of fact, I'm surprised that General Manager Joe Douglas in New York, former vice president and player personnel for the Eagles, didn't say something about the Jets potentially hiring Doug Pederson, because I do think that he can have a head coaching job in the NFL, or at least be on a staff. Jeffrey Lurie came out and literally said that Doug didn't even need to lose his job. He didn't deserve to lose it. So hiring Nick Sirianni, God bless him, I hope he does great. I would love to see the Eagles succeed. That being said, you can't really expect him to do a great coaching job when he doesn't have great players around him. And I think the real source of this issue is General Manager Howie Roseman. I'm going to be real here. The fact that Howie Roseman has a job at all after both Carson Wentz and Doug Pederson have been fired is absolutely insane. And last year's draft is just the tip of the iceberg. So why don't we look? Why don't we look at this draft in the first place? Jalen Reagor in the first round. Now, a lot of people were shocked the moment that this pick happened, and what transpired in this 2020 season did not help the case of Howie Roseman whatsoever. First of all, the Eagles drafted Jalen Reagor not only over outstanding receivers like Justin Jefferson, T. Higgins, Chase Claypool, even Michael Pittman had a better year than Jalen Reagor objectively. That's just the beginning of the possibilities that could have went at this draft pick. We're talking about players such as Kenneth Murray and Patrick Queen, potential starting linebackers for a completely depleted linebacker group, and quite frankly, I think with the 53rd overall pick, we could have gotten Jalen Reagor. And now, speaking of Jalen, we're going to talk about the other Jalen we drafted in the second round. Now, I will defend this Jalen Hurts pick to the grave. Jalen Hurts, without a doubt, should have been a first-round pick. I think, just based off of his resume alone in college, he should have went in the first round. The guy's an incredible talent. The guy's a leader. He's a great guy to have in your locker room nonetheless. And he, regardless of if he could be an NFL starter or not, he could at least compete for a starting spot on a football team. The fact that he fell to the 53rd overall pick.
It's ridiculous.
So I understand the Jalen Hurts pick. This guy should not have been there at 53. But the rest of this draft is just absolutely atrocious. Davion Taylor was less than competent at the linebacker position. The guy barely played, even though we had absolutely no talent at that spot. Kayvon Wallace actually has quite a bit of promise, and I think he was a good pick in the 4th round. But the only reason he even played this year is because Rodney, went down with an injury, and we just didn't really have any depth at that position. Jack Driscoll, he played, but he only played because, because we can't stay healthy. John Hightower can't catch a football. Sean Bradley played, and, as a 6th-round pick contributed well, but he's not a starting linebacker. Quez Watkins is in a very similar situation to John Hightower, where, he's a very fast guy. He's going to be open, but it doesn't matter because he's not going to catch the football. Prince Tegawanago didn't even make the roster, and Casey Toohill was on the roster for a handful of games, but then we cut him. So this draft, all in all, was probably the worst out of any team in the 2020 NFL draft. But do you want to know why this was the worst draft of all? It's because former Philadelphia Eagles Vice President of Player Personnel, Joe Douglas, was hired in 2019 to be the general manager of the New York Jets. Now, after he was hired to cover that position, the Eagles had their worst draft in the past 4 or 5 years. Coincidence? I think not. But let's dive a little bit deeper. So, Joe Douglas came to the Philadelphia Eagles in 2016, at the beginning of the Doug Pederson era. In his first draft, we got Carson Wentz, Isaac Seumalo, Wendell Smallwood, Halapaluti, we got Vaitai, Blake Countess, who, he's bounced around the league, but he's still in the league, Jalen Mills, who's been a heavy contributor, and Joe Walker. It's a pretty solid first draft considering that we didn't have a 2nd-round pick, and a lot of these guys we got in the 5th, 6th, and 7th round, so pretty solid draft. Then the following draft, we get Derek Barnett. He's been a heavy contributor, a pretty solid pass rusher on this football team. Sidney Jones, who's currently starting for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Razzle Douglas, who's starting for the Panthers. Mac Hollins, who's still got a job in this league despite, the fact that he's got to do a dance every time, he does something right. Guys like Nate Jerry, who's contributed quite a bit on this team. Shelton Gibson, who, he just really can't stay healthy, but he's pretty fast. And then you go to the draft after that. Dallas Goedert, Devontae Maddox, Josh Sweat, Matt Pryor, and Jordan Mailata. We didn't even have a 1st-round pick that year, and all of these guys have been heavy contributors to this football team. I mean, I'm pretty sure every single one of these players started at least 1 game last year, and that is true. The 2019 NFL Draft is a toss-up. In the 1st round, we get Andre Dillard, who's been a bust so far, but he had a really good game against Khalil Mack, which showed some promise. Miles Sanders has been, an above-average running back for this football team, but J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin was just... And then Sharif Miller and Clayton Thorson also just pretty disappointing. And that leads us up to the 2020 NFL Draft. Joe Douglas had a pretty impressive draft for his first year as a general manager in New York. I mean, overall, when you compare apples to apples, the draft that the Philadelphia Eagles had and the draft that Joe Douglas had with the Jets this year, it's starting to look like Howie Roseman wasn't necessarily the reason that we had that championship roster in 2017. But Howie's ineptitude on the draft board is just the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about just his lack of ability at the GM spot. First of all, he pays Carson Wentz a 9-digit paycheck, and Carson Wentz in his entire career has never played a playoff game. It mind boggles me how, Dak hasn't been paid yet Dak has been more available and arguably more consistent than Carson Wentz. And we gave Carson Wentz 9 digits, even though his resume lacks, the one thing that you grade a quarterback off of, which is playoff wins. But he goes and drafts Jalen Hurts, which, again, I defended the Jalen Hurts pick before. I think having a solid backup. You're only as good as your backup quarterback. And I truly believe that, but it doesn't make sense to pay Carson Wentz 9 figures. Here's the real kicker. So my older brother pointed this out, and I got to give him credit for it. Thank you, Moose. The Eagles are spending over $40 million on the defensive tackle position on 3 different players. That's Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, and Malik Jackson. Now, I'm not necessarily complaining. I like having a great defensive line. But only 2 of them couldn't be on the field at one time, and we're paying 3 of them starting caliber D-tackle money. I mean, Howie, knock knock. There must be something wrong with Howie, because we're $50 million over the cap right now, and that's after cutting Deshaun Jackson and trading Carson Wentz. And we're still gonna cut Alshon Jeffrey and a handful of other players, and we'll still be significantly over the cap. That's just what's obviously in front of our faces right now. It's so ridiculous. I mean, you look at these numbers, and we're paying 3 offensive linemen over $40 million. That's Lane Johnson, Brandon Brooks, and Jason Kelsey. All great players, but $40 million for 3 starters? I mean, the way that we've handled this situation with Carson Wentz, Doug Pederson, and poor Jalen Hurts, who's now got to miraculously take this roster, that can't afford to pay anybody, is basically a hospital at this point, considering the amount of injuries we have. Now he's got to somehow make it work next year and fight for a starting spot. Now we're talking about drafting a quarterback. I mean, what the hell is going on in Philly? But I will tell you this. As long as Howie Roseman is the general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles, we will be drafting 6 overall quite a bit. Thank you for watching.